this is a very, you'll get a quantitative question on this, but in your reference handbook on page 22, there's that table at the end of the page or at the middle of the page where it's showing 3 different types of effects. So there's additive effect, synergistic effect, and antagonistic effect. So there's nowhere in your reference handbook where there are listing these relative toxicity values for specific chemicals. So you're not going to be expected on the exam to determine a specific overall relative toxicity. What you need to be able to determine is if you're given 2 chemicals, right? And let's say one chemical has a relative toxicity of 2, another chemical has a relative toxicity of 3, and they tell you the overall toxicity is 5, and they ask you what kind of effect is being observed. Your answer choices will be additive, synergistic, and antagonistic, and there'll be something else, some other answer term for choice D. The answer is additive because if your overall sum of toxicities is equal to the actual sum of the given toxicities, then your 2 compounds have an additive effect. Okay, so the effect of the chemicals are additive, so you can add those up. Now, this is not always the case in real life. So the example they give for synergistic is if you're smoking cigarettes in a room where asbestos is in the air, your effect is not just going to be additive, it's going to be much more greater due to the impact of both. So that's why they give an example of 2 plus 3 is equal to 20. So on the exam, if they give you an example where the summation is not equal to the actual sum, but it's much greater, then you have a synergistic effect. And synergism refers to the effect caused when exposure to 2 or more chemicals at the one time results in health effects that are greater than the sum of the individual chemicals. So think about it. If you're smoking in a room where there's asbestos in the air, there's a synergistic effect because not only are your lungs being damaged from the cigarette smoking, if some of you may know if you've dealt with asbestos, but asbestos can stay in your lungs and it leads to very serious long-term effects. And that's why when you're working in asbestos or with asbestos, it's always required to wear a respirator. We'll go through respirators in this class actually. So that compounding effect leads to a greater value than 5. So that's what that means. That's synergistic effect. Now, there are cases where you'll have an increase in your health hazard, so antagonistic effect, but the increase is still lower than the actual sum. So if you look at the example in the reference handbook, 6 plus 6 is equal to 8. So it's not equal to 12. So if you get a question on the exam where your overall sum is lower than the actual sum, that's the antagonistic effect. And the example they give is, I believe it's caffeine and alcohol, right? So some of you may know when alcohol is mixed with caffeine, studies show that the caffeine can mask sort of the depressing effects of alcohol, making drinkers more alert than they would feel otherwise. So that's what that means. It's kind of minimizing the effect of the alcohol a little bit. So that's why it's antagonistic. Okay? So everyone okay with that and understands that these are not values you're looking up in your reference handbook. They're not in the reference handbook. Just be ready for a qualitative type question.